everybody, it's Eric Pappenfuss. It's Friday, so it must be time for another buy day. And today, Olivia, in honor of Women's History Month, we are going to talk about two notorious women. And I'm going to put a question mark after that because although they were notorious in their lifetimes, I would argue that they deserve some recognition and reinterpretation today. And today's buy day is actually inspired by a funny book I found on our own outdoor carts. And if you know the Midtown Scholar, you know what? We've got 20, 30, 40 outdoor carts with dollar books on them on a daily basis. And you can find almost anything. One thing you can easily find are a lot of mass market paperbacks. And in reverse order today, we're going to start with a funny book. You ready? All right. So the funny book, which inspired today, found on our own carts, is none other than Six Criminal Women by Elizabeth Jenkins. Now, I got to say, I really liked the cover on this book. It's got everything you'd want in a vintage paperback. You've got the executioner. You've got the, the sort of faint image of a woman who is she? We don't know. And then you've got the great tagline. Does it make you want to read it? More deadly than the male. Yeah, not bad. So who were these six criminal women, I said, as I picked up this pocket book? And I ran through them and I found that one of them was a woman by the name of Lady Ivie. And I'm like, wait a minute. We just got in a book related to Lady Ivie. And here it is. Now, come over here, Olivia. We're going to put this down on here and I'm going to tell you, in general, I am really interested in old trial transcripts and books that are about, say, famous trials. I like murder trials. I like trials for piracy. I like trials for treason, that sort of thing. But I picked this one up, which is a 17th century British trial, simply because I knew nothing about it and I wanted to learn more. This came from an auction, and it's called The Famous Trial Between Thomas Neal and the Late Lady Theodosia Ivie, that took place in 1684 in front of the late Lord Jeffreys. Now, Lord Jeffreys was known as the hanging judge because he had a reputation. He didn't mess with anybody, and he would send you to the gallows without thinking. So one of the reasons I love old trials is because of the transcripts. And this book quickly goes from a wonderful sort of title page into a series of transcripts of the trial. Can you sort of see here? It's the Lord Chief Justice says this, Lady Ivie says this, the witness says this. Just to give you a little snippet of what's going on here. I would like to ask him one short question, my lord. I think it's a fair one. Lord Chief Justice, I, in God's name, ask what fair questions you will, but no leading ones. Well, your witness is drunk, madam, he says to my Lady Ivie. My lord, he does not understand what he says, that is plain. Brother, all knaves are fools, and one kind, too. Have you read the date of the deed? My lord, if you please, we will go on with our other evidence while we let him recollect himself and consider it. It just goes on and on and on. Great flavor, right? So we learn, if we read this, that at question are the deeds to some lands in an area of East London called Wapping, which is within a short walk of Tower Bridge. If you've ever been, it's in East London. And Lady Ivie has produced deeds which shows that she owns this land, but there are developers, much like there are developers here today, that want to turn it into ritzy condos and all sorts of things. And right now it is a rather ritzy, exciting neighborhood. And they are claiming that her deeds are forged. Well, when did you find the deed? He asked the witness. Well, I found it in the garret of Miss Ivie's. Are you sure of that? Yes, I'm sure of this. It's rat-eaten. See? Look, it's rat-eaten. And it goes back and forth. And basically, Lady Ivie is accused of forging these deeds, making the paper look old by simulating rat bites and leaving it out in the weather. She is found guilty of this forgery and is forced to relinquish all of her lands. Here is a cool map. Isn't this a cool map? So this is the Thames. London is over here, and you can see that this is area that's sort of been dredged out of the Thames, so it's reclaimed land, and they're fighting over it. And everything in red is considered no longer hers, according to the court. Now, what makes this even more interesting is that the first trial says the deeds are forged, and therefore Lady Ivie does not own the land, and yes, you guys can develop it. But then the developers bring a second trial against Lady Ivie for forgery, trying to get her punished for what she did, and that's what this is. This is The trial transcripts, with one addition, Olivia. They've decided to put in her divorce proceedings. Look at this. Really, it really does also include a pamphlet heretofore written and sent out by Sir Thomas Ivie, her husband himself, and here now reprinted again. And it is basically a series of pleas to Oliver Cromwell. Come check this thing out about why her husband shouldn't have to pay alimony to Lady Ivie, which is basically trying to poison the jury pool even more at this time to say she was not a good woman. And this is very interesting too, because it's all one-sided. So it only reproduces like his letters to her, but not her letters back to him. And, you know, he calls her most dear heart and sweetheart and, you know, my dearest life and all these beautiful, beautiful sentiments. But you wouldn't know from reading this that she accuses him of adultery, of basically impregnating the maid, of abusing her, and you know, it goes on and on and on. And not only is Lady Ivie stripped of her lands, which today would be worth perhaps hundreds, if not billions of dollars, but her reputation, and then she dies, and she's memorialized in the 6 Criminal Women. I think this is terribly unfair, and we're going to need to go back and examine these records more closely and rehabilitate Lady Ivie. But now we're going to come up into 19th century America with a second notorious woman that has to do with Harrisburg, and we're going to talk about Anne Royall. Okay? Olivia, you've probably never heard of Anne Royall, and you know what? You should have, because she was the first woman to sort of make her living as both a journalist and a travel writer and a newspaper publisher, all of these things. And she was also the last person to be convicted in a trial for being a, quote, common scold. And that is a term that you would think would be more appropriate for the 17th century than the 19th century. But in 1829, the year she published this book that just came into the Scholar, take a look at this, which is one of her travel stories. This is her Pennsylvania one, and we've got some juicy Harrisburg gossip, which we'll get to in a minute. But in that same year, she was convicted by a circuit court, federal court in Washington, D.C., of being a common scold. And you know what this was an old common law term for somebody who was considered disagreeable and evil, unfairly only applied to women at the time, not to men. And you know what the sentence? What you know what you're supposed to do if you were convicted of being?
What?
You had to be put in a ducking chair. Do you know what a ducking chair is? Well, think back to witchcraft days. A ducking chair would be a chair where you'd be strapped in and then you'd be ducked into the water. You might drown, but this was the punishment, and it was still on the books and as late as 1829 in Washington, D.C. At any rate, this was in the midst of the Second Great Awakening. She was very much a proponent of the separation of church and state, and there were evangelicals that were just giving her a hard time and were using public buildings for their meeting houses, and she cursed them out, basically, and she got in big trouble. She did call to her defense the Secretary of War and other members of the Jackson administration, which was pretty good. And she was very well connected at the time because she had made her living writing these types of travel books. And the reason her books were bestsellers of the 1820s and 1830s, Olivia, is because they were very sincere critiques of the sort of contemporary society. And she sold her books by subscription. So she'd go to Harrisburg. She'd say, will you support this book? And if you support this book, you probably got a very nice description in the book. And if you didn't, you better watch out. She would not spare you. And so when the books came out, everybody would run to the booksellers and they would get a copy of the book and they would check furiously to see if they were mentioned in the book. Anne Royall also is quite famous for a story which may or may not be apocryphal, which is she may have been the first female journalist to get an interview with a sitting president, and this was John Quincy Adams. We know that she met with John Quincy Adams. We know that she knew Louisa, his wife. We know that they had a bit of a back and forth. But the story is that JQA liked to go swimming in the morning, sans all clothing in the Potomac. You know, it was one of these things. And she tracked him down one morning, and she sat on his pile of clothes and refused to get up until he granted her an interview. And what she was trying to do was get a pension for herself because she had been married to a soldier who fought in the American Revolution, and in order to get a pension as a widow, you had to appeal to Congress. And this is the story. Interestingly enough, she was accused of forgery because by the family of her late husband, who claimed that she forged this will of her late husband. She was never married. She didn't deserve a pension, this sort of thing. So a lot of similarities, I think, to Miss Ivie. Should we get to the Harrisburg part? I think we should. I did choose Ms. Royall's Pennsylvania travels so you could get a sense of these travel guides. She also wrote a sort of muckraking newspaper and all. She's just an absolutely fascinating person, Anne Royall. But she comes to Harrisburg. And when she comes to Harrisburg, well, let me just ask you, do you think she liked Harrisburg or didn't like Harrisburg, Olivia? Just take a guess.
I think she liked it.
Yeah. So Charles Dickens very famously will later come to Harrisburg, and he didn't much like Harrisburg. But boy, did Anne Royall like Harrisburg. I gotta tell you, you want to hear a little bit? Here we go. Harrisburg, the capital of Pennsylvania, is seated on the banks of the Susquehanna, one of the most charming spots on the globe. Nothing could add to its beauty if we accept ships and steamboats. The land here, the whole distance from Middletown, equals any of the rich bottom land. It goes on and on. The Susquehanna flows in the smooth but quick currents in Harrisburg. It's about a mile in breadth, and this place is very much like the Ohio. On and on and on. And then, do you know where she goes first when she visits Harrisburg? She goes to her bookseller, who is a man by the name of Wyeth, who is on 2nd Street, right where Market Square is today in Harrisburg. And she says to Wyeth, I need to meet the governor. And he takes her to Governor Schultz's house. And she walks in and she gets to meet the governor. Now, we know that the governor was a subscriber because it's a very flattering portrait of Governor Schultz. By the way, Governor Schultz's house is still there. It's also the house that General Lafayette went to on his American tour. It's right next to the downtown Dauphin County Library on Front Street. But at any rate, she goes on and on with 3 pages about how wonderful Schultz is. He was very affable. He conversed freely on various topics, and he laughed at the description I had received of him. Such as Governor Schultz, a gentle, honest German who doubtless, like all public men, has his friends and has his enemies. She even says he really looks more like 40 than he is 50. He might even be able to pass for 30. I mean, this is a flattering portrait of Governor Schultz. So that is Anne Royall. She would publish these books. You didn't necessarily want to be in it unless you were a subscriber, and they were incredibly, incredibly popular. From Harrisburg, she went on to Carlisle. Has some interesting things to say about Dickinson College, and this is basically the Mid-Atlantic version. There's a good section on Chambersburg and all sorts of other parts along the way. A very rare book because it was really read to pieces back in the time. Today, I think Anne Royall is somebody who really ought to be remembered. Somebody whose journalism was unflinching, but in many cases fair, and was not afraid to report things that many other authors were. She didn't start writing her travel logs until she was in her 50s. She did this in a way that supported herself, the first woman in American history to be able to make a living doing this. She went from town to town without a chaperone, which was also very unusual at the time. And she definitely spoke her mind at all points. So a fascinating notorious woman. Theodosia Ivie and Anne Royall in honor of Women's History Month. Well, that is another edition of By Day Friday. Thank you for watching. We have all sorts of incredible stuff coming in to the sort room over the next several weeks. So I hope to bring you a lot more interesting things. I hope you'll watch next Friday and every Friday at noon for more adventures in the world of books.